On the 23rd of December, 1888, a man cut off part of his ear, wrapped it in newspaper, walked to a brothel, handed it to a woman named Rachel, and went home. And the only person who ever said he did it himself was the one man in the house who had every reason to make sure the story went that way. That story is in every textbook, every biopic. It is, genuinely, the first thing people say, as if the painting was just the footnote and the ear was the real work. Van Gogh himself wrote roughly 800 letters over his lifetime. He never once described cutting off his own ear. Not in passing, not obliquely, not at all. 800 letters, and the most famous thing he supposedly did never came up. In 2008, two German researchers, Hans Kaufmann and Rita Wildegans, published a book arguing that Van Gogh didn't cut off his ear, that Gauguin did it, and that both men agreed to say nothing. The Van Gogh Museum reviewed the theory, considered the evidence, rejected it entirely. The story stayed exactly where it had always been. Lesson: if you're going to be the only narrator, make sure the other person never gets a pen. And to understand why Gauguin might have needed that, you have to know who he actually was before he showed up in Arles. In the 1870s, Paul Gauguin was earning the equivalent of $145,000 a year and doubling it on the side. Vincent van Gogh had never sold a painting before that. 6 years as a sailor, then a stockbroker's clerk at the Paris Bourse, 30,000 francs a year within 8 years, with a side operation in the art market. Physically imposing, worldly, trained in fencing, not the resume of a man who loses arguments. Then the Paris stock market crashed in 1882. Fortune gone, he chose painting. You could frame that as a courageous, artistic commitment. His Danish wife, Mette, left to support their 5 children alone in Copenhagen, may have had a different frame for it. By 1888, despite the wreckage, Gauguin had genuine critical standing, exhibited with the Impressionists, canvases selling through Theo's dealership for 200 to 300 francs apiece. He had a track record. He had leverage. He knew it. Van Gogh, meanwhile, had never sold a painting. He lived entirely on a monthly allowance from Theo, roughly 150 to 200 francs, and spent an estimated 80% of it on paint and canvas. Most people cover rent first. Vincent had a different system. Theo was earning 11,000 to 14,000 francs a year. Van Gogh's upkeep consumed roughly 20% of that, every month for 10 consecutive years. Every month, 10 years. Theo never complained. That fact should probably bother us more than it does. The only painting Van Gogh ever confirmed selling in his lifetime, The Red Vineyard, painted in Arles in October 1888 during a walk with Gauguin, fetched 400 francs in March 1890, 4 months before he died. By 1909, the same canvas resold for 30,000 francs. He didn't live to see any of it. But Gauguin did, and he had a great deal to say about what happened in that house. Gauguin arrived in Arles on the 23rd of October, 1888. Van Gogh had been asking him to come for months. The yellow house had been prepared specifically for him. Furnished, stocked, arranged. Van Gogh had spent money he didn't have getting it ready. This was not a casual arrangement. This was Van Gogh's entire plan for his life. On the morning of the 23rd of December, 9 weeks after Gauguin arrived, Van Gogh received a letter from Theo. Researcher Bernadette Murphy's analysis suggests it carried news of Theo's engagement to Jo Bonger. If that reading is correct, Van Gogh learned in a single morning that the brother bankrolling his life was starting a family, and that the one person he'd built the yellow house around was threatening to leave. Both on the same day. That evening, the two men quarreled. Gauguin left, checked into a hotel, did not stay to see what happened next. Around 11:30 that night, And I want you to sit with this sequence for a moment. Van Gogh appeared at a nearby brothel and handed his severed ear to a young woman known as Rachel. The following morning, Christmas Eve, police found Van Gogh at home, severely bleeding. He was admitted to the Arles hospital and treated by Dr. Felix Ray. The official certificate describing the incident, unsigned, attributed to a Dr. Urpar via the hospital to the mayor of Arles, records that Le Sieur Vincent removed his ear with a razor stroke and was mentally afflicted, the earliest institutional document. And it attributed everything to Van Gogh. Also that morning, Gauguin sent a telegram to Theo. Not a doctor, not the police. Theo, his art dealer, his financial backer, the man who controlled the money. Think of it as texting your landlord before calling an ambulance. Theo took the night train and arrived approximately Christmas Day. He and Gauguin then left Arles together for Paris. Despite Van Gogh's repeated pleas, Gauguin never visited him in hospital. He never came back. On the 30th of December, the local paper Le Forum Républicain ran a brief item in its Chronique Locale column reporting the incident. That is the full extent of the contemporary public record. So that's the timeline. Here's what Kaufmann and Wildegans argue it actually means, based on their reading of the letters. The authors argue Van Gogh's silence was protective, that he was emotionally dependent on Gauguin, had spent months preparing the Yellow House for him, and dreaded his departure enough to shield him from prosecution rather than lose him entirely. A man who'd rather take the blame than be abandoned. That's not an implausible reading of Vincent van Gogh. Gauguin, they argue, had the inverse motive, as the sole surviving narrator, framing the act as Van Gogh's self-inflicted madness removed any legal or reputational exposure. He was a trained fencer. He was the one who left. And he was the one who got to write the story. There's even a letter, Gauguin to the critic André Fontaines, written later, in which Gauguin describes Van Gogh approvingly as a man of sealed lips. Kaufmann and Wildegans read this as a tacit acknowledgement of the pact. You could read that as a general tribute to Van Gogh's character. Both readings are available. Only one of them required Gauguin to stay out of prison. But here's where the theory runs into a wall. The Van Gogh Museum's curator Louis van Tilburg assessed it plainly. Speculation, no smoking gun, no recovered weapon, no confirming letter from Vincent. And crucially, police were present the following morning. Gauguin was right there. He was not arrested, not questioned, not detained. If the police saw anything that pointed at Gauguin, they didn't act on it. Critics also noted that the wound, as documented, was too clean and precise to be consistent with a slashing blade strike in the dark. The case pulls you in, then it pulls you back. But what it cost Van Gogh, whatever actually happened that night, that part is not ambiguous at all. 30 residents of Arles signed a petition demanding Van Gogh be confined. Not Gauguin, already back in Paris, never questioned. Van Gogh. The man found bleeding in his own home on Christmas Eve. He was repeatedly hospitalized over the following months. On the 8th of May 1889, he committed himself to the asylum at Saint-Rémy-de-Provence. He signed himself in. Gauguin, meanwhile, lived until the 8th of May 1903, 15 years after Arles. In all that time, he never publicly retracted his account, never amended it, never added a footnote. 15 years. Not one correction. Apparently, he had nothing to add. The Van Gogh Museum publicly declined to revise its account after the 2008 theory. Curator Louis van Tilburg called the evidence insufficient. The established field agreed. And that, officially, was that. But in July 2016, a single document changed what we thought we knew. Not about who did it, but about what was actually done. Researcher Bernadette Murphy surfaced a diagram. And this is the kind of thing that only happens in art history. drawn by the treating physician Dr. Felix Ray, made in 1930 for biographer Irving Stone, held at the Bancroft Library at the University of California, Berkeley. The diagram showed that nearly the entire ear had been removed, with a clean incision consistent with a razor. Not just the lobe, as the popular version had always claimed, and not the slashing blade strike the sword theory required. Call this one right answer, wrong question, because what Ray's diagram established was the instrument and the extent of the wound, not whose hand held it. It dismantled the sword theory and the just the lobe myth simultaneously, and left the actual question exactly where it had always been. On one side, a memoir written years after the fact by the one man present with reason to shape it. On the other, a contemporaneous physician's certificate and that same physician's anatomical drawing. The closest thing to physical evidence this story has, and it points at a razor in Van Gogh's hand, while leaving just enough room that the question has never fully closed. Van Gogh died on the 29th of July, 1890. He was 37. Gauguin outlived him by 13 years and never changed his story. Van Gogh, in all the letters he wrote before he died, never told his either. A razor took nearly the entire ear. Clean incision, not a sword, not just the lobe. Here is what it doesn't prove: whose hand held it. The canonical version of that night was written by the one adult present who had reason to shape it, and the one man it accused, who wrote roughly 800 letters before he died, never once pushed back. Not once. And he never said a word. But the instrument was never really the question. The silence is. Did Van Gogh stay quiet because the breakdown was his and there was nothing else to say? Or did he stay quiet to protect the one person whose presence had meant everything, and whose absence, after that night, was permanent? One of those silences is a man falling apart. The other is a man making a choice. We don't know which. We have never known. And the most unbearable version of this story is the one where Van Gogh knew exactly what he was doing, and did it anyway.